Last night, Virginia voted 51 to 49 on a ballot initiative that would redraw its congressional districts to heavily favor Democrats, projecting to change its congressional delegation from 6 Democrats and 5 Republicans to 10 Democrats and 1 Republican. Republican operative Scott Jennings said this on CNN.
Virginia literally had the fairest maps in the nation. They had a 6-5 map, 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans. In terms of proportional representation, they had the fairest map in the nation that was drawn, by the way, by an independent commission that the voters asked for just a few years ago. Now they will have the least fair maps in the nation. And
this was parroted by conservatives on Fox, on Twitter, and anywhere else that's still grading heavily on the curve. Democracy under threat, mass disenfranchisement, the tyranny of the majority.
How is that at all fair? How is that fair?
You didn't give Texans
How
a
is
right
that fair?
to vote.
Welcome to Mundangerous Thoughts. I'm Shane. Let's talk about how conservatives are trying to paint a picture with the ugly truth just out of frame. The story starts in Texas, where the right hat and digging a lucky hole can turn you into a Republican intellectual overnight. The Texas GOP, at President Trump's urging, came up with a scheme to head off the midterm congressional losses. They'd simply redraw the districts for 2026, completely unprompted and totally out of phase with the 10-year census cycle. Their justification? Nothing says they can't. This sort of limit testing of the guardrails of our democracy has become commonplace since Trump's first term in 2016. For the younger viewers who don't remember politics before they were poisoned by Trump, this kind of blatantly anti-democratic scheme would have seen bipartisan condemnation, judicial intervention, and ultimately would have cost Republicans a ton of seats in the state and national legislatures during the Clinton, Bush, or even Obama years. That's how far our democratic norms have shifted under the Cheeto-in-chief. Anyway, it took a couple tries, but Texas finally got its districts redrawn to favor roughly 4 extra Republican seats. Seeing this underway in Texas, several other Republican-held state legislatures began making moves towards similar mid-cycle redistricting efforts, which, again, are unprecedented violations of the norms. Missouri, North Carolina, and Ohio all followed, while Utah, Indiana, Maryland, and Florida all tried. In Utah, the efforts failed so spectacularly that the Democrats actually picked up a seat from this gerrymandering effort. Indiana and Maryland both failed when some of their Republican lawmakers showed an actual backbone. Efforts are still underway in Florida, but it's getting awfully hard to gerrymander any further. Lawmakers in Tallahassee weren't too keen to dive into governor and failed presidential candidate Ron DeSantis' plan. It's very possible the bill dies in committee this cycle. In total, these Republican efforts netted 9 seats and lost 1. It disenfranchised hundreds of thousands of voters across these states, all without the electorate, that is, the people in We the People, having an input. Given they currently have a roughly 5-seat majority, this would greatly expand their advantage in the House of Representatives, making it that much harder for Democrats to take control in 2026. The net effect of this would diminish the representation and disenfranchise millions of Democratic voters, especially in blue states. That seems anti-democratic. But here's the thing about schemes and political games. Your opponent gets to play too. I grew up in Georgia, and when I was a kid, I had a bully that pushed me around on the playground. I came home one day in pretty bad shape and refused to tell my parents about it. Finally, my dad sat me down and I told him what happened. Now, my dad was a commercial truck driver, a blue-collar guy. He cared about hunting and fishing and football and NASCAR, not studying in good grades. He couldn't help me with my math homework, but he gave me good advice for how to deal with a bully. He told me, hit him as hard as you can, and if he gets up, hit him again. No matter how hard he hits you back, don't stop. He said, even if you end up taking a beating, a bully won't bother you again. It's one-time pain for peace forever. It just won't be worth it for him. Texas punched the voters in the mouth, but the Democrats decided they were going to make sure it wasn't worth it. First, California responded with freshly drawn maps, netting 5 Democratic seats after a public referendum approved them. New York also tried, but efforts were blocked. And then Virginia. Sweet Virginia. In 2025, Virginia had a Democratic state Senate and a 51-49 Democratic margin in the House of Delegates. In order to bypass the bipartisan commission and redraw the maps, they needed an amendment to the state constitution. That amendment needed to be passed by 2 consecutive legislatures and a vote of the general public. This is no small task, especially with state elections being held in November 2025. It looked like Republicans might actually get away with it.
A few moments later.
Just kidding. Democrats flipped the governor blue and expanded their majority in the House of Delegates. Abigail Spanberger took office, and despite initially opposing this effort, the legislature did manage to push it through. And this is where I get to mention the most based politician in America, Senate pro tempore Louise Lucas, who was instrumental in leading the effort. But I'll have more on the Queen of Portsmouth, Virginia later. Last night, Virginia voters passed the public referendum and adopted the maps for the 2026 midterms, netting 4 more Democratic seats. Now that the dust is settled, let's look at the state of play per CNN. Those morons lost a seat? What kind of fuck? Let's go back to Scott Jennings' framing of this vote.
Virginia literally had the fairest maps in the nation. They had a 6-5 map, 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans. In terms of proportional representation, they had the fairest map in the nation that was drawn, by the way, by an independent commission that the voters asked for just a few years ago. Now they will have the least fair maps in the nation. And I'm not surprised that the yes vote won. They had all the money and all the lies. And sometimes in politics, when you got those two things, you can put something over the line. Even something as egregious as this whole thing has driven Spanberger's approval ratings down into the toilet. She lied to the people of Virginia. They had to write a ballot question that was a joke. They drew maps that were a joke. Now you're going to have huge chunks of rural Virginia represented by 5 or 6 Democrats who all live in northern Virginia within about 15 miles of each other. It's a complete joke. Everybody knows it. And there's a reason that all these national Democrats and all their money came into Virginia because, they don't really care about the people of Virginia. They just care about power.
The infuriating thing is, he's not necessarily wrong. This is a deeply anti-democratic move in Virginia. Last night, a margin of 90,000 votes will disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of Republican voters. This does look a lot like the proverbial democracy means 51% can vote away the rights of the 49% story in action. But only if you focus on last night and last night alone. And that's where Jennings and all the reeling conservative commentators are being so disingenuous. First, just on the surface, it didn't take 90,000 votes to change the maps. It took 2 consecutive legislatures passing the amendment, and after the first one passed, the Democrats' majority massively expanded on the promise it would pass the amendment again and refer it to the public. You may argue the first passage ran counter to the will of the people, but the second sure didn't, nor did the public referendum. Second, this deliberately ignores the efforts of the Republican Party in other states to diminish representation of Virginia Democrats in Congress, because unlike the framers contemplated, this is a winner-take-all, 2-party system. The way to think about this on a federal level is that the disenfranchised Democratic voters in Texas are now represented by congresspeople in California and Virginia. This is very stupid, but that's gerrymandering for you. And for people like Jennings, this is how politics is supposed to work. North Carolina has one of the most gerrymandered maps in the country, and it gets redrawn constantly because it's constantly challenged because it's so bad. Its current House delegation is 10 Republicans and 4 Democrats, or 71% Republican representation. In 2024, Trump won less than 51% of the vote. Another way to put that, 20% of North Carolina's Democrats are disenfranchised in the U.S. House. And remember, none of this would have happened if Republicans hadn't made a bid to retain control of the House through mid-cycle redistricting. They started it. Republicans desperately want to unlink these events, and from a certain states' rights framing, maybe they should. But this is federalism in a 2-party system, in a highly interconnected, mobile, modern monoculture. When you fuck around in one state, you find out in another. Remember when Texas put bounties on women who left the state to seek abortions? Well, now there's a bounty on fascist pigs trying to undermine the republic. If you try to gerrymander in red states, Democrats will take your seats in blue states. And the reality is, red states already rely so heavily on gerrymandering, there are a lot more seats for them to lose than there are for them to gain. With all this, it seems like it would be a reasonable protection of our democracy to prevent partisan gerrymandering. What does Scott think?
Scott, if you were a member of Congress, would you vote to ban gerrymandering?
Well, I actually am rather protective of the states making these decisions.
That's a no.
I don't have...
That's Neera Tanden, by the way, and she's right. Scott Jennings is upset because his side got outmaneuvered, not because he believes this is wrong. Gerrymandering isn't a problem that needs to be fixed. Democrats gerrymandering better than Republicans is the problem that needs to be fixed. God forbid the GOP use their $600 million fundraising advantage to govern with policies that help people and win elections by improving their material condition, instead of crying foul when someone unrigs the deck they bought and paid for. Now, before I wrap up, I promised I would offer some appreciation for Louise Lucas and her social media team. She's pretty active on Twitter in a normal politician's way, but she's also a grandmother, and, well, when you see what she posts sometimes, I think she's just handed her phone to her grandkids to handle the shit posting, and let me tell you, they are cooking. Let's take a look at some of her best tweets. Good work, Virginia. Hey, if you like what I do here and want to support independent media, click like and subscribe, or maybe drop a comment down below to help the algorithm. It's super helpful to a brand new channel like mine and doesn't cost you a thing. You can check out more of my videos about games, hobbies, and politics here on the Mundangerous Thoughts YouTube channel, or one of these videos that YouTube thinks you might like.